So last time when we met, this was around Thanksgiving, and I spoke about gratitude. And I also said, that I've observed that since I'm doing these practices in the last few weeks in particular, it became obvious to me that there is from time to time like a spontaneous upwelling of gratitude in the meditation. And then I was like contemplating, that, and then it came to me that I think it's the result of the increased visceral experience of our deep embeddedness in the web of life, or at least it's much easier to remember it. And by viscerally experiencing this interconnectedness, the earth, so to say, corrects our perception status by, bringing back online these receptors in our bodies that have been turned off systematically by Western education in the service of progress, to get us out of superstitious, animistic ways of understanding ourselves and our lives into this assumption of separation in order to make us more effective or something. And now, we are basically landed with the repercussion of all of this, and we are waking up to the fact that we need to change. We need to change direction again. It's not working. These, super materialistically informed perception processes, which we have been training in through our culture, they need to change to more sacred ones, to more reverent ones, devoted ones. And because, perception is empty and shapeable, we can intentionally choose to train in a quote-unquote soulful perception in order to restore that sacredness. In a perception which is a perception between subjects, not objects. And of course, that's not like a quick fix, but it starts with noticing it. And I think that's, one of the pillars of what we are doing here, to try to shift the view, the way of looking, intentionally. And bringing back a perception of sacredness, because it's really vital for the survival of our species, really. It's not just like a luxury or like a naive thing, but it's a matter of connecting with the way things truly are. Because if we live in this shrunken, contracted perception, it just simply cuts us off from reality. So we need to bring back the bigger picture of who we are and where we live by paying attention to how we perceive and how our perception is basically conditioned and can be reconditioned if we choose to do that. We literally can educate our perceptions. Because perception has a creative quality and basically fabricates a world out of sense data. It's a fluid process that can be changed, trained, educated in particular ways. And from the Buddhist teaching, we know, whenever our sense organs connect or contact an object, it results like in a whole series of processes. First there's like the sense object, let's say the chair over there, and then there's the physical sense organ, the eye, and then there's sense consciousness, which is a mental awareness of the stimulus which is seen over there, the chair, for example. And the seeing is like an experience of light waves, which, are coming in as colors and shapes, or the hearing of vibrations in the air, so-called sound waves, which we experience as amplitude and frequency. That's all there is to it. And then perception takes over and identifies that information which has been experienced, and then recognize it as a flower, a chair, whatever, with language and so on. All of the conditioning comes in. And then a feeling tone, Vedana, arises in the mind, like automatically, to classify the object as pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And from there onwards, if that object is engaging the mind, if it's interesting enough or scary enough, various other processes set in, like thinking, comparing, craving. And, for those who have an experience more in the Buddhist teaching, it's called dependent origination, paticca samuppada, like a whole process. And if the mind is not, if there is still ignorance in the mind, it usually tends to end with suffering. And, for the untrained mind, that's all like a big soup. And then in meditation, we slow it down and we simplify it in order to see the different parts of that process, and to understand, how we are basically processing information which comes in. And if we see that a little bit more clearly through slowing down, it can become more and more liberating, because we can see, that's the way things are, and we have actually an opportunity to do something about it. And that's what is the intention of these meetings also, to help us to begin to consciously, intentionally reframe perception, from the old paradigm of we are on top of the earth, human supremacy, and this is all about us, to a different paradigm, which is, simply speaking, we are part of a living, intelligent earth. We are cells in a vast body, and we have an opportunity, to listen to the intelligence of this vast process we are a part of, and become expressions of that by bringing back a reverence and a devotion for the process, to make it again sacred, to elicit devotion and reverence and gratitude and all of what comes with that, and a sense of acceptance and willingness to serve the process. Or, sometimes I call it, to volunteer to become part of the immune system of the planet. And, the Buddha's teaching is very precise when it comes to those, initially hidden processes of how all of it works, how the perception process works. And at this time, our culture is all about buying and selling and making things more efficient, and now increasingly more and more of us seeing, that this isn't really sustainable. and starting to, getting interested in different ways of looking. And then, we see everything in a different light. And I have shared that with you in the past, but I'd like to share it again today, like the transition prayer, which is like on the Earth Room page on the website. Just to help, to pull together a framework for this important work of reframing perception. Just gonna read that now, and it's you can find it on the website, and I update it from time to time. Aloka Earth Room is a laboratory for inquiry on how to adapt, create resiliency, and become more attuned to the current cultural context of the Anthropocene, late-stage modernity. To be a contributing force for cultural evolution, we need to embody new and ancient ways of being. This requires great acts of courage as we shed our old belief systems, programming, and stories. We recognize that the evolutionary force that puts the stars in motion is moving through us, and is a dynamic, self-organizing process whose grace and guidance we can trust. Our vision is a future in which everyone knows themselves as part of a living, intelligent Earth. Our prayer is to create an imprint of lived possibility, in solidarity with all life, in dialogue with the living planet, and in service to the collective transition. How do we become stewards in service of all life while walking the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path? I trust and surrender to the guidance of the Dharma, biointelligence, and emergence. I want to serve the letting go of old forms and emergence of the new until liberation from all suffering. So just let us allow the body to relax wherever we are sitting, relaxing into the pull of gravity. And just noticing, everything you are bringing with you here today. Being where we are and being willing to engage. engaging with our experience. And with the out breath, gently sending down some roots into the ground underneath where we are sitting, the soil. And letting go of all burdens, if there are any burdens you've brought here today. And breathing up the stability and the stillness and vastness of the presence of the earth. And bringing up the image of sitting inside of earth. and sensing into that aliveness, from which we have emerged and which keeps us alive through eating, drinking, and breathing every moment. So consciously perceiving in that way. That's a intentional choice to look in that way, to bring up that way of looking. And as we are doing that, all of the unfinished business somehow also comes up, is felt. And just staying there, staying engaged with that. The humility of staying with the process, the willingness. To sense deeply, we must imagine. And to imagine accurately, we must sense. So being being with this aliveness, the vibrancy, and the perception of being inside of Earth, being part of such a vast process. And the vulnerability of that. And just putting down any defenses which come up by thinking about something else. And just coming back to that direct experience of that aliveness. The vibrancy which is informing us that aliveness before it goes into expressions. Being part of a shared communication system with the Earth, with the planet, with Gaia. And consciously adjusting our perception so that we can experience ourselves in that way. leaving behind the old paradigm of human supremacy and moving into communion, membership. And a sense of reverence and devotion to that process. And that that new way of looking is the medicine. And we need to take the medicine on a regular basis for a long time for it to really change us deeply, but we can begin. Can begin, to make ourselves available for that work, which is difficult. Learning a new skill, learning a new language. And sometimes we might feel discouraged. It looks like that's just all too much. But it's a joint venture. We are all together in this. Just doing our share. And knowing it's about a remembering. It's not like inventing something new, but it's a remembering. And this, the images, the way of looking, the intentional perception are guide, for that remembering. Because at the, very deep level of our psyche, this knowing is there. It's part of the development of our species. But it has been covered over. And, when we see young children who haven't been educated to that degree yet, really young children, we notice that they have that sense of awe still in relationship to the natural world. And we enjoy, being in the presence. Because we know it's true. Because at that level, we do know that we are part of a living intelligent earth, that we have emerged out of the earth literally. The willingness, to stay with that vulnerability and the uncertainty. What does the earth need from me now? Staying with that aliveness, the vibrancy, the vibration, and allow that to change us from the ground up. Staying with the process, staying engaged. That's all we really need to remember. Softening and staying with. This is a joint mission. This is not a individual duty, but this is a joint mission and we are all together in this. Reframing cultural perceptions is a long-term work. We recognize that the evolutionary force that puts the stars in motion is moving through us and is a dynamic self-organizing process whose grace and guidance we can trust. And sensing into that force, that aliveness. In order to know more fully, viscerally, that we are part of a living, intelligent earth. In order to become stewards in service for what needs to be known, what needs to be lived, needs to be understood. With this cultural paradigm shift we are inside of right now, with the Buddha's teaching, as our support. The Noble Eightfold Path, so that we can more fully surrender to that guidance of the living intelligence of the planet, and at the same time that is the Dharma expressing itself as this planet, and we are part of it. So sitting into that vastness and then bringing that back into our lives, into the small things of our lives, in our relationships, in our lives. And that's the difficult part. But we are doing what we can, one step at a time.